My fellow Americans, today a tragedy has befallen our great nation. I hear your pain, and I've heard your cries. As you know, my administration takes these events with utmost seriousness and severity. That's why, after much deliberation, we have decided that we are going to do absolutely nothing. Hello? You're joking. Again? My fellow Americans, I have just received word that yet another terrible tragedy has befallen our nation. I understand that emotions are high and the tension even more so. I just want to make it very, very clear to you all that I get it. And that's why we've decided to take action. We have decided that we're going to do, once again, absolutely nothing. Oh, got it. Yeah. My fellow Americans, once again, our great nation The USA is by far the most important, relevant, and influential country in the entirety of the Western world. When America speaks, the rest of the world listens, whether we like it or not. But that influence also comes at a price. And that price is that whenever something happens in America, the rest of us all know about it and thus talk about it, whether they like it or not. Now, obviously, I'm not an American. Thank God. But I've always thought that if I was, I'd probably be very annoyed. Mostly, as the USA is a very complex country with a lot of internal law that, unless you lived there, you probably just wouldn't understand. And so, if I had to constantly hear the rest of the world back-talking about my country 24/7, despite the fact that most of them don't have a clue what they're talking about, I'd be pretty damn livid too. I mean, honestly, it feels like people talk about America more these days than they do their own countries. And so, I want to make it clear right off the bat to the Americans watching this that I get it. The last thing you want to hear is a smug, limey redcoat lecture you on how to run your country's affairs. I mean, after all, you fought a war just so you didn't have to do that anymore. Unfortunately. However, this is a topic that I've been following now for around a decade. And whenever such tragedies happen, I can't help but slowly lose my faith in humanity when observing the absolutely useless viewpoints that most people conjure up in response. Not just from within America, but the wider world at large. So partisan, so tribal, so completely incapable of thinking outside of their own political perspective. I am of course referring to mass shootings. Whenever a mass shooting in America happens, I can't help but notice the exact same conversation take place, time and time again. Here's how it goes. A mass shooting happens, the American left blames the American right blames the American left, people slowly forget about it and move on, until another one happens, and the cycle repeats ad infinitum. The Americans seem to be stuck in this endless blame game, where everyone admits there's a problem, but no one can agree on a solution. But the truth is that if you really want to understand what makes someone a mass shooter, and even more importantly, how to prevent them from becoming so, then you can't just rely on mere politics alone. Instead, you have to delve deep into the realms of criminal psychology. Because criminal psychology doesn't care about whether you're left wing, right wing, or chicken wing. If you just want to hear someone that's going to repeat only your political faction's talking points over and over again, then you've come to the wrong place. But for those of you who want to analyse the human psyche and get into the actual root causes of this terrible issue, then you've come to the right place. So, without further ado, let's begin. Before we can delve into the psychological reasons why people commit mass shootings, we're going to have to deal with the elephant in the room. or perhaps more accurately, the elephant and the donkey in the room. As alluded to earlier, the Democrats and Republicans, America's premier left-wing and right-wing parties, both have completely different viewpoints on the causes of mass shootings. In order to get a glimpse into the differences between these two factions, we only need to see what they say about each other after such tragedies occur. R/politics and R/conservative are two large internet echo chambers for both the American left and American right, respectively. After a mass shooting in an elementary school in Texas, both of these respective forums opened up a thread to individually discuss the matter. While both sides mourned the victims and scorned the shooter, when it came to what was to blame, the similarities between them all but ended. Examples of comments from the left are,
"This is our reality. We're evil for saying the solution is gun control. They're good for saying they want more deputies in schools and to arm teachers. America is crazy, and we can't stop it because those in power don't care. Common sense gun laws, please. The GOP love murder, love the pointless cruelty and sadism and twisted hero complex from allowing these murders to occur."
Meanwhile, examples of comments from the right are,
"We have a massive mental health crisis in this country, disguised as a gun crisis. US really needs to work on mental health, especially after all this COVID crap. Again, banning guns is not the solution. Can we just focus on promoting and funding mental health clinics and force all to be a part of it? We can't sit down and let this happen anymore."
What we see here is two groups of people observing the exact same situation, coming to a vastly different conclusion. The American left believe that the number one cause of mass shootings is the ease of accessibility of such firearms themselves, and actively view their rivals, the Republicans, as morally reprehensible for continuing to allow such cases to happen in the name of their own personal freedom. On the other hand, the American right believe that America's rapidly expanding mental health crisis is ultimately to blame for such acts, and that guns are merely being used as a scapegoat by their opportunistic Democrat rivals, as a means to consolidate more state control over the masses. So who's right, and who's wrong? Spoiler alert, they're both wrong. Let's start with the Democrats. The Democrat argument states that because mass shootings are a phenomenon that mainly occur in the United States, whereby guns are widely available, that if guns were more regulated or simply outright banned, that such shootings would be much less likely, or just simply end outright. And yeah, technically this is an accurate observation. The less guns are easily available, the more difficult it is to commit a mass shooting. Obviously. But it's also just not that simple. Whenever a mass shooting in America happens, it always annoys me when my fellow Brits say stupid things like, "Why don't they just ban the guns?" On the one hand, I understand why they say this. In 1996, the UK suffered a mass shooting, colloquially known as the Dunblane Massacre, whereby a man went into a school, shot dead 16 students and one teacher, then killed himself. In response to this, then Prime Minister John Major passed the Firearms Amendment Act, which essentially banned the possession of all handguns for private citizens. Ever since, there has never been another mass shooting at a school in Britain again, and thus, many people simply think that banning guns equals no more mass shootings. And while this logic makes complete sense when put that way, you're missing out on a lot of details. The reason why it was so easy for the British government to make handgun possession illegal is because Britain never had a gun-owning culture to begin with. It's not like people before 1996 would just waltz around London with a revolver strapped to their hip. The only people in Britain who really even used guns often were farmers. Banning handgun possession in Britain was probably about as easy as banning strippers in Mecca. But you can't just apply a British solution to an American problem. The United States of America was founded in exceptionally unique circumstances, formed in rejection of concepts such as monarchy and class elitism, both of which were so rampant in Europe during that time. The USA was made not to be a country that was ran from the top down, but the bottom up. For the people, of the people, by the people.
But the people are retarded.
Individual liberty and personal freedom for the common man was prioritised by the founding fathers for this very reason, with the ownership of arms being part of this package of rights, as stated in the Second Amendment of their Constitution. The idea being that should a tyrannical government ever attempt to oppress the American people, they would still have a means to defend themselves against such aggression. How applicable this logic is to the modern day is up for debate, but also besides the point. Whether people like it or not, guns have been a premier part of American life now for centuries. It's deeply ingrained in the American psyche, with strong ties to the very foundations of the nation. To tell an American to willingly hand in their guns is in a sense metaphorically saying that they should hand over their liberty and sacrifice a part of what makes America, America. You might not get it, and you don't have to get it, but that's the situation, and it should be respected. Now, if you could turn back time to 1776, then maybe you'd have a chance at eliminating America's gun culture. But now, trying to ban guns in America would be like trying to ban tea in Britain. Good luck. I mean, for Christ's sake, the population of America is around 320 million people, while the amount of guns is estimated to be around 400 million. There's more guns than there are people. Even if the Democrats got their way and guns were heavily regulated or even outright banned, how, exactly, do they plan to enforce such laws? They aren't seriously under the delusion that people would just hand in their weapons peacefully, are they? Because if they're that stupid, I've got some magic beans to sell them. Ironically enough, the uproar that would come from just trying to ban guns would probably end up outstripping the long-term benefits you'd get from doing it in the first place. A very stupid idea. Besides, since when do criminals follow laws? With over 400 million guns spread across the country, not even the greatest buyback program of all time would ever be able to mop them all up. There would always be a huge underground market of them in practically every major city. I mean, if a mass shooter doesn't have a problem with murdering scores of people, I seriously doubt they're going to undergo a moral dilemma about owning a gun illegally. Killing kids? Whatever. Owning a gun without a permit? Well, that's where I draw the line. Point is that a criminal is always going to be able to get their hands on a gun in America, no matter what the laws are. Remember earlier when I said that Britain hadn't had a mass shooting since Dunblane? No, you don't remember that, because that's not what I said. I said that there had never been a mass shooting at a school in Britain again, but there absolutely has been mass shootings in Britain since. The Cumbria shootings in 2010, which killed 13 people, including the gunman himself, and the 2021 Plymouth shooting, which killed 6 people, again, including the gunman himself. That's right, even with some of the most restrictive gun regulations on the planet, mass shootings were still possible, even here in Britain. And if they're possible here, they'd certainly still be possible in America. Bottom line is, the only people these laws would end up affecting are the actual law-abiding citizens, which is a pretty dumb idea. From my observations, the Democrats' obsession with guns seems to be well-intentioned for the most part, but ultimately simple-minded and utterly out of touch with their own nation's history, story, and most importantly of all, large parts of their rural populations, who, rather than trying to hear and understand, they simply brand as backwards rednecks and call them dumb instead, which to me translates into typical urbanite elitism. If I, as someone who lives halfway across the world from your country, could still study and understand this viewpoint, then the very least you could do for your fellow countrymen is to do the same. Which brings us on to the Republicans. The Republican argument states that guns don't kill people kill people, and that the focus on guns is merely secondary to the real important matter at hand, which is America's rapidly declining mental health crisis. And yeah, they might be onto something here. In the 1930s and 1940s, there were only 3 notable mass shootings across America during each decade. In the 50s, this number increased to 4, in the 60s to 7, in the 70s to 19, in the 80s to 22, in the 90s to 32, in the 2000s to 39, and in the 2010s to 123? What? In fact, in the first 5 months of 2022 alone, there has been 9 notable mass shootings. That means that in 5 months in 2022, there has been more notable mass shootings than there were in 20 years back in the 1930s and 1940s. Okay, that's crazy. It is, but you'll notice how I said notable mass shootings. Notable just meaning a shooting that has been so well documented that it has its own nickname, received huge amounts of media attention, and probably has its own Wikipedia article. But it shouldn't exactly be so surprising that there's been a huge increase in shootings that could be classified as notable, as with advancements in technology, particularly with the invention of the smartphone, it's only becoming easier and easier to document such events, which could be responsible for this huge uptick in the 2010s. Yet there are also plenty of mass shootings that happen in America that often go under the radar, being not very well documented or given the media attention they deserve, many of which occur on an almost daily basis. Either way, whether it's notable shootings or those under the radar, the overall trend remains clear. Mass shootings in America are going up over time. But it's not just the quantity that's going up, but the carnage of them. Despite the fact that guns have been actively available for the general population in the US ever since the nation's creation in the 1700s, 6 of the most deadliest mass shootings in American history have all happened after the year 2000. Even if we take into consideration the advancements in arms technology since, the Democrat argument of simply blaming guns seems to be much less plausible than the Republican argument of mental health being to blame. However, that's a bit rich, isn't it? For the political party who has, for the last few decades, done everything it possibly can to stifle public healthcare funding in the United States, to now turn around and say that there's a mental health crisis would be quite comedic if it wasn't so sad. Indeed, as it turns out, spending public taxpayer funds on ensuring that your population is mentally sound is actually a pretty good investment in the long run. Certainly money better spent than funding another $2 trillion war in the Middle East, that's for sure. For too long, Republicans have been brainwashed by the wealthiest in America to believe that any public service the government provides is essentially some form of communism. As if getting a state-funded therapist is going to reincarnate the corpse of Joseph Stalin into the White House. It's just nonsense. And the fact it took an epidemic of children getting shot in order to come to this beyond simple realization is frankly unbelievable. Point is, both parties are full of malarkey. All in all, if we reverse engineer the mindset of a mass shooter, we have a very mentally ill person, of which the Republicans blame, who then uses a gun to kill people, of which the Democrats blame. However, what baffles me is, why does nobody ever ask, why are there so many mentally ill people in the first place? Surely, if we were able to identify the real root causes of why people become so deranged, then this entire string of events would ultimately be retconned. I believe there are 8 main reasons why mental health in America is so poor, all of which are often swept under the rug as if they aren't important. But they are important, and it's about time that people not just in America, but around the world start talking about them. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into each one of these reasons, as frankly, they all deserve a dedicated episode in of themselves, but we can, at the very least, touch on them. Starting with number 1, fatherlessness. I've spoke about this many times in the past, and I've put this as number 1 as I think this is one of the biggest problems that we have in the Western world. Ever since the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, intercourse has been treated as a sort of recreational act without consequence, as opposed to what it actually is, which is a sacred act that can be life-changing. Intercourse was never meant to be an informal event, like going for a meal or riding a bike. But because of this disgraceful liberalization of one of the most personal and serious things 2 people will ever do in their lives, as a product of our decadence, we have inadvertently created a generation of accidents, many of which will grow up undisciplined, directionless, and ultimately without purpose, courtesy of the rising unholy commonplace combo of single moms and deadbeat dads. As you can see, the divorce rate since the 1960s has absolutely skyrocketed. Not that it matters much, mind you, as the amount of children born outside of wedlock has also gone through the roof. So much so that they will soon even constitute a majority. Not exactly surprising, considering that most people today don't even know what the point of marriage even is. At some point, we, as a civilization, have to come to terms with the fact that yes, our actions do in fact have consequences. That 30 seconds of hedonistic pleasure can often result in years' worth of torment, or, for the really deprived, a murder. And no matter how much people try to push contraception, in reality, the ultimate form of contraception is common sense. The conservative society that was dominant before the 1960s may have been cold, strict, and rigid, but it was that way for a reason. Because it worked. Husbands were able to work for their wives, and wives were able to look after their husbands. The roles for both men and women were clear as crystal, and this constituted a safe, steady, and stable environment for their offspring to grow and prosper. But as soon as these lines became blurred, chaos dawned, and the false virtues of social justice paved the way for the creation of broken families on an almost industrial scale. Anyone who's ever grown up in a broken family can attest to how difficult it can be. Without a stable father figure, men are 2.5 times more likely to deal drugs, 2 times more likely to be obese, 2 times more likely to drop out of school, and perhaps most relevant to this conversation, 2.5 times more likely to carry a gun. Meanwhile, women who grow up without a stable father figure are 4 times more likely to grow up in poverty, 7 times more likely to get pregnant when young, and 2 times more likely to lose their child during pregnancy. The liberalization of intercourse and the destruction of the family unit is one of the worst things any civilization in human history has ever done to themselves. To pretend, as we do, that having a broken family unit doesn't have any significant effect on the mental stability of the youth who grow up in such environments is not just flat out wrong, but bourgeoisie ignorance at its finest. The reality is that this combination of a lack of decent role models, huge instability, and a generally disgusting social culture at large, unsurprisingly, tends to produce legions of disenfranchised youth with a chip on their shoulder. Some of which unleash their frustrations on innocents in the only way they know how: violently. Number 2. Lack of anchoring. Anchoring is an economic term that I use to describe how many tangible investments a person has. Someone who is economically anchored in their society would have a lot to lose should things turn south, as they may own their own house, car, etc., etc. Someone who is not economically anchored in their society, however, would have none of those things, and thus have nothing to lose should chaos strike. Increasingly, young people have found themselves considerably unanchored in their societies. What flavour of pot noodle do I want to buy today? As the rich have been allowed to consolidate their wealth, purchases that were once considered standard, such as a house, have become naught more than a dream for many. As such, most young people have become increasingly disillusioned with the economy, with many now believing that even if they do everything that is expected of them, they simply won't be rewarded for it as their forefathers were. Which is, for the most part, completely true. Though money is certainly not the root of all evil, when people have no tangible stake in society, and more importantly, believe they never will, it's hard for them not to feel resentment towards such a society. And though the vast majority of such disillusioned youth certainly won't become mass shooters, to pretend as if poverty and desperation isn't a gateway drug to mental illness and committing crimes is simply beyond naive. Number 3. The death of spirituality. People today always like to poo-poo anything that's in the spiritual realm. The amount of pseudo-intellectuals that I encounter who like to mock faith, arguing over the most minute of details, mostly in a vain attempt to seem more intelligent than they actually are, is mind-numbing. Especially those who constantly focus on the few bad actors who have used religion as a means to profiteer, while ignoring the billions of others of whom it benefits. I mean, honestly, the way that some people talk about religion, like Christianity or Islam, you'd think it was 2010. It's like, have you guys not grown out of the whole edgy atheist phase yet? No. We need religion. Have you seen what happened when societies no longer become religious? Well, if you want to know, turn on the television. That's what happens. We need religion. We need it, whether you like it or not. It's been proven time and time again that religious people tend to be much happier than their so-called enlightened atheist counterparts. And really? Is it any wonder? All of the mainstream religions provide their believers with a set of universal blanket beliefs that inspire people to live a pious, charitable, and dignified life, giving those in dire circumstances hope that this earth is not all that there is, and that so long as they keep it together, they too will one day be rewarded for their patience. At the same time, it also detracts people away from bad behaviour and negative vices by threatening punishment to those who are unjust and wicked. Religion and spirituality at large forces people to try to be better. It rejects animalistic hedonistic pleasure in search of ascending into a greater mindset, not just for yourself, but for all those around you. We only need to look at the morally vacuous, consumerist, and individualistic society that such lack of faith quickly produces in order to know that, in the end, the good that religion can provide to people most certainly outweighs the bad. Number 4. Lack of meaningful relations. You know, it really is quite incredible. Thanks to recent advancements in technology, humanity has factually never been more interconnected. Despite this, however, people overall now report to feel far more lonelier than ever before. The natural means of communication, kinship, and bonding have been all but severed, and in its place is naught more than algorithmic manipulations that are seemingly designed to make people despise one another, as communication has now been mostly downgraded into the virtual. Mere voice, or even worse, text. To make matters worse, as most people are now glued to their screens and living terminally online, basic social etiquette has been all but forgotten, as can easily be proven by looking into virtually any YouTube comment section. Well, except mine, of course. You guys are actually quite pleasant. You know, the best comment that I think I've ever received is when someone said that I look like everyone's dad before they were born. Most people you meet online will likely be living in other countries, or perhaps even other continents. And while it is true that you can certainly have a good time with such people virtually, it can never truly compare to that of the physical. Finding a partner has also been a painstaking task for many, with degenerative dating apps flooding the market, turning human beings into naught more than products that can be ordered or refused. Human beings are naturally social creatures. We were never designed to live in the algorithmically determined antisocial hellscape that we today do. When a person feels like they are a belonging member of a community, their mindset is completely different to that of someone who feels as if they are an outsider, who doesn't belong anywhere. To say that a person with a stable circle of well-minded friends and a partner who loves them wouldn't even consider committing such terrible acts really should be common sense. Yet rather than rectify our society's obsession with failed technological dependence, we instead just expand it and expect everything to work out in the end. But it won't. Now, technology is certainly never just going to go away, but we must change our design philosophy from having it replace our lives to instead augmenting it for the better. Number 5. Zero focus on men's issues. We can't talk about mass shooters without acknowledging the fact that the overwhelming majority of them are men. According to Statistica, when a mass shooting is defined as a single attack that results in the death of 4 or more people, men make up over 95% of such incidents. Now, this shouldn't exactly be too much of a surprise, as after all, most crimes are overwhelmingly committed by men in general. But why? What is it exactly that makes men more likely to commit crimes than women? The answer, for the most part, is actually quite simple. Testosterone. Testosterone is a primarily male hormone that is perhaps the ultimate example of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, given the right circumstances, testosterone can be a fantastic thing, renowned for making people braver and much more prone to act under stressful or dangerous circumstances. Think running into a burning building to save someone, or diving into the ocean to prevent someone from drowning. But under the wrong circumstances, testosterone can also do the exact opposite, fermenting people with an uncontrollable anger that causes them to do things that they'll later go on to regret. Due to a combination of all the reasons listed earlier, and much, much more, many men today often find themselves being controlled by their testosterone as opposed to controlling it. But in response, society at large, rather than sympathising with such men and actively trying to conjure solutions to assist them, instead often ignores them, or even worse, just makes fun of them, for simply stating their frustrations. America, and the Western world in general, so corrupted by the current poisonous progressive status quo, simply can't comprehend the fact that men too can also have problems, instead choosing to blame them en masse and treating them as if they're some sort of broken species that can't be fixed, when in reality, it isn't the men that are broken, but the society that constantly and consistently fails them. Well, to be fair, it fails women too. In fact, it fails everyone. What are we doing? Until this nonsense ideology is defeated, which is admittedly inevitable, this situation is almost guaranteed to get worse. But for those men who do struggle with controlling their anger, pro tip, take up fitness. It's always better to tame your rage and use it to make you physically stronger than let it rule you and make you mentally weaker. I mean, after all, just look at me. Look guys, I know this might be hard to believe, but if you work out enough, you will one day have muscles like me. I know you're thinking, oh, that's impossible. Dare to dream. Number 6. Media fame causing copycats. It's actually quite incredible just how much the news scene has changed since the dawn of the millennium. Back before the 2000s, there wasn't really any such thing as a 24-hour news channel. The news would simply be a half-an-hour-long slot that would just state the facts about what went on in the world before ending for the day. Then came 9/11. 9/11 was such an unbelievable event that it completely transformed the way that news was delivered. You know that little bar at the bottom of every news channel? That's called the ticker, and it was originally invented because there was so much information coming in about the 9/11 attacks that they wanted a place to put it all on screen. The ticker would prove to be a highly successful addition to the news, and thus it stayed and quickly became standard across the entire industry, as did the extension of the news into being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whereby time would often be filled by garnering numerous different opinions and trying to keep people hooked to the TV as much as possible. In this new form of news media, whenever a terrible event like a mass shooting happens, many news organizations will run with it and talk about it endlessly for at least the next few days, garnering huge amounts of attention to the story, but also to the shooters. According to researchers at both Arizona State University and Northeastern Illinois University, as many as 20 to 30% of mass shootings are set off by other mass shootings, with such a copycat effect lasting for around just under 2 weeks. Something that the American media doesn't seem to understand about mass shooters is that they're not just bloodthirsty, they're also suicidal, hence why a large proportion of them also tend to kill themselves after committing their crimes, such as with the examples here in the UK that I listed earlier. Psychologically, many of these people have felt like they have been unjustly wronged and ignored by society at large for most of their lives. And so, by committing the act of taking another person's life away, not only do they believe that they are in part getting revenge on the society that mistreated them, but also gaining the notoriety that they so desperately crave on the way out. Make no mistake, mass shootings, like all tragedies, should always be reported on, as they are most certainly events that are in the public interest. However, this constant 24/7 media attention after the fact can in large part actively inadvertently inspire many deranged people into going through with such crimes. News needs to go back to the way it used to be: informative, intelligent, objective, and factual, not a 24/7 infotainment show. Number 7. Demonization of immutable characteristics. On the 12th of April 2022, a man travelled to a subway station in New York City armed with a Glock and a set of smoke grenades. While he didn't fortunately manage to kill anyone, he did injure 29 people and escaped from the scene of the crime. After a short manhunt, he was then later arrested. This man was a 62-year-old called Frank. Before the attack, Frank had a YouTube channel, which he would use to upload very long, hate-filled rant videos, whereby he'd frequently make violent threats, particularly aimed towards white people. In a video whereby he talked about a white woman he used to know, he said, I would kill you, but it's not worth the time in jail. Killing you would be like killing a cockroach, you're not even a human being to me. Frank constantly stated that he believed that a race war in America was imminent, and strongly believed that the creation of an American Nazi party was inevitable, that would be out to get him because of his race. 1 month later, on the 14th of May 2022, a man in Buffalo, New York, armed with an AR-15, would go on to kill 10 people and injure 3 others. This man was an 18-year-old called Peyton. Before the attack, Peyton wrote a multi-hundred-page manifesto, much of which was plagiarized from other mass shooters, whereby he declares that the American government is actively conspiring to kill white people. In his declarations, Peyton heavily blamed black people, who he believed were being complicit in such ideas. Hence, why all 10 of his victims were black. He would later be arrested and charged with first-degree murder. So here we have 2 men from roughly the same part of the country who committed crimes against innocents because they both separately believed that the American state was out to get them because of their race. But how did they manage to come to such viewpoints in the first place? Could it possibly be the fact that for the last 10 years, a large chunk of the American media has been disgustingly blaming all of America's problems on specific demographic groups, while telling everyone else outside of these groups that the country and all of its subsequent institutions are, always have been, and always will be stacked against them? Thus, creating a huge amount of artificial division between the common people based purely on immutable characteristics. Meanwhile, in the background, America's wealthy corporate elite continue to nickel and dime the country without anyone even noticing? Yeah, that sounds about right. The American people need to smarten up and realise, as I've said time and time again, that you're all being taken for a ride. There is no one specific group of people responsible for all your country's problems. Not black people, not white people, not men, and not women. No one, except your wealthy elites, who actively profiteer from artificially manufacturing such division amongst you all, causing chaos ad infinitum. You need to understand that the real war that your country has is a class war, and right now, the rich are winning and laughing at you. Now, that's not to say that each demographic group doesn't have the right to state their own individual grievances. Black people have every right to be annoyed at the way they often get treated by police. White people have every right to be annoyed at how any racism they face is constantly dismissed. Men have every right to be annoyed at the lack of focus on men's issues. And women have every right to be annoyed at the fact that they are statistically more unhappier than ever. But the way to deal with these issues isn't by pointing the finger at one another, but by working together. Until the American people stop allowing themselves to be artificially divided up and universally boycott their outrageous mainstream media apparatuses, this situation will only continue to get worse. And number 8. Social media echo chambers. It's not exactly a secret that most big tech websites have a massive political bias. Who'd have thought that putting the headquarters of all the world's largest websites in one tiny valley in California would turn out not to be a very wise idea after all? For example, Reddit is perhaps the ultimate example of a company with almost zero diversity of thought, with almost all of its employees espousing extreme far-left beliefs. Inevitably, such biases would translate over to the actual website itself, whereby everyone to the right of Joseph Stalin either gets silenced or just outright banned. This overall just resulted in Reddit becoming one giant echo chamber, whereby extremist behaviour, such as advocating violence, racism, and much more, is never corrected or challenged, so long as those doing it hold the same political beliefs as the company. This then inevitably results in those who have been censored, which in this case would be conservatives, to seek alternate forums who would accept them, such as 4chan, which then also becomes yet another giant echo chamber, just in the exact opposite way. Essentially, rather than having one big platform where people are constantly exposed to a wide range of ideas and beliefs, because of the foolishly brash decisions of some employees of many big tech companies, now we have a sort of parallel multipolar internet, whereby each side holds a rigid and often extremely negative set of beliefs that never interact with each other, but are both hell-bent on each other's destruction. Which, needless to say, rapidly increases radicalization across the board. It's my belief that free speech, and perhaps more importantly, diversity of thought, is paramount to a healthy society and ultimately democracy. You can't just put tape on the mouths of people who disagree with you while unjustly amplifying the voices of those who do agree with you. Social media websites simply must be regulated into submission. No, private companies shouldn't just be able to do whatever they want. If I wanted to set up a business where I sell people plastics to eat, I'd be quickly shut down for putting the public's health in danger. The same logic should also apply here. Social media, in its current form, is completely destroying the whole world, and should they be allowed to continue their reign of terror, will inevitably only result in much more chaos, division, and strife. So, there we have it. Despite not being American, studying the psychology behind mass shootings truly gives me chills, because it's such a blatant and universally recognised sign of a culture that no longer has its priorities straight, and is rapidly declining as a result. And it's not just America, but the entirety of the Western world. Let's not pretend as if such crimes wouldn't be just as common elsewhere if the gun culture was just as prevalent. When you poll people on whether or not they still get fazed hearing the news that there's been yet another mass shooting, most people now say that they don't. They've become so commonplace now that it's almost become routine to hear about them. The facts are that we have all, individually and collectively, allowed our nations to be ran by awful people, and even worse ideas, living in the moment with absolutely no regard for the future. But the truth is that no government's just going to be able to wave a magic wand and fix this issue, as it goes much deeper than mere administration. But I am confident that, as the old saying goes, it's always darkest before dawn. So long as the family unit is repaired, economic anchoring is returned, spirituality is revived, meaningful relations are regained, attention is given to men's issues, the media no longer causes copycats, people are no longer intentionally divided, and social media becomes fair and regulated, then not only will there be much less mental illness all around, but a much less trigger-happy population as a result. Things will get worse before they get better, but make no mistake, change is in the air. The only question you have to ask yourself, dear viewer, is do you want to be part of that change, looking at the world pragmatically to try to make it better and more peaceful, or would you instead prefer to simply carry on being a pawn in a culture war that no matter what side you're on, you are always guaranteed to lose? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Spread the word! Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's a very depressing topic. I tried to make it a little bit less sad. You know, I didn't want you leaving and then having to go and take some antidepressants, you know. What do you think would prevent mass shootings? I'm curious if you think that the reasons that I've listed are the reasons why, or perhaps you've got some other ones to add. Or maybe you think I'm wrong on some of my reasons. I don't know. I always read the comments. I love reading the comments, whether you agree or disagree. I love reading them. It's like, I don't know, I'm addicted to them. I am addicted to comments. Anyway, time to give a shout out to the Wall of Famers. My 2 pence, Ardent Word, Daniel H. V, Andrew Hamrick, Philippe M, Scrophulus Rex. Am I pronouncing this right? Okay, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Wes FR, Bob Page, Denton Cassels, BW Gaming, and Trevor. Welcome to you, sir. But yeah, folks, I see so many people these days, especially young people, and they're so very unbelievably depressive and nihilistic, and I say chin up! Chin up! Just because things are terrible now does not mean that they're always going to be terrible. Yes, it will get worse before it gets better, as I always say, but make no mistake, change is in the air.